And joining us live now is former Israeli government official Dror Doran. I really appreciate your time. Thank you. What is your reaction to the scenes we've been seeing unfold in Gaza in recent hours?
Thank you very much. I think the fact is that the ceasefire has collapsed more than 2 weeks ago. If you remember, the ceasefire was signed mid-January. It was effective for a month or so, during which Israel enabled humanitarian aid to go into Gaza, the end of hostilities, and from Hamas side, the release of some 40 Israeli hostages. But for the last 2 weeks, there has not been even one hostage release. Hamas refused the conditions of the release terms delivered by the American representatives. So Israel practically found itself in a situation when Hamas has been able to enjoy a ceasefire for a month and a half by now, without getting the benefits of releasing any hostages. And I think it became to a point that this is an unsustainable situation by Israel. And I think Israel practically lacks any other pressure tools on Hamas besides the military action. And this is what the Israeli government chose to do in order to try to jumpstart the negotiation on the release of the remaining hostages once again.
How would you characterise the US's role and position at the moment? The White House confirmed a bit earlier the Israeli government consulted with the White House ahead of these strikes.
I think the current relationship between the Trump administration and the Israeli decision makers is very close. I think the perspective of how to deal with terror organizations, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, is pretty much aligned. And I think the sensation of not being able to push forward with a ceasefire agreement and with the release of the remaining hostages is understandable when it comes from the White House point of view. And I think Israel has a lot of backing coming out from Washington to do what it needs in order to push Hamas to continue with the ceasefire, to continue with the release of the remaining hostages. And I think this is what we're seeing. I think we should remember that both Israel and Hamas went into the ceasefire with total contradicting goals. Hamas is wishing to secure its regime in Gaza, and Israel is wishing to eliminate Hamas regime in Gaza while releasing the hostages. So it was kind of predictable that at a certain stage, the ceasefire will collapse. This is why, from the beginning, the ceasefire had two stages. Israel and Hamas were able to terminate or to finish the first phase, but once they tried to renegotiate the second phase, I think the very deep gaps in the perception of the ceasefire were very clear, and this is what brought us to the current point that there is, from the Israeli perspective, there is no other tool to push Hamas forward unless the use of military force.
Joel, this all comes, of course, just after Donald Trump had warned Iran that it would face consequences of further attacks from Yemen's Houthi rebels, that you mentioned a little bit earlier in your answer. Is the broader region looking increasingly unstable?
I think there is not a direct connection between the situation in Yemen and what happened in Gaza. I think it's more like a sentiment coming out from both Washington and Jerusalem that a harsh response is needed in order to convince both Hamas and the Houthis to change their modus operandi. And I think this is what we're saying. The question whether Washington or Israel will turn against Iran, again, which is the sponsor of both Hamas and the Houthis, is yet to be answered. I think it's a different ballgame. Military action against Iran is something that the region has never seen in a significant scale yet, and I'm not sure we are exactly at that point yet. It's a major decision. It needs to be calculated very carefully, both in Jerusalem and in Washington and in Tehran, of course.
Dror Doran, really appreciate your analysis and reaction to that big breaking news story this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.